Jesus had just asked Peter, James, and John, you couldn't sit with me for 1 hour? And then suddenly he straightened up. Did he hear something? Did he sense the presence of change? For one moment, the heavy air was still, and suddenly every one of the 12 men in Gethsemane heard him. They're coming. They found us. We're not alone in this garden. The look on Jesus' face had changed. The sorrow had been replaced by a steely-eyed determination. The time had come. He reached his hand down to Peter, whose body had suddenly begun to tense up. Rise, let's be going. See, my betrayer's at hand. The seeds of betrayal had been sown earlier. A few hours ago, they were enjoying a tense Passover meal. Jesus had done some weird things, but he always did odd stuff. There was foot washing, there was talk of betrayal, and after the day that we had on Sunday, maybe this was just figurative, but then after dinner, they'd broken the cardinal rule of Passover. They'd gone outside. Walking through the silent, abandoned streets, Jesus had started telling them that after this betrayal was done, they were supposed to meet him in Galilee, but one of their number was missing. Partway through dinner, Judas had slipped out. Maybe nobody had noticed, but if they had noticed, would it have been that big of a deal? After all, Judas managed the money. Maybe they were running low on supplies. Maybe they needed something. Maybe they remembered that there was something overlooked back at the temple. Maybe he just had to go settle up some business because the festival, once it got going, there'd be no getting anything in the city. It'd be completely shut down. So, who knows? He left. It wasn't too odd. Likely he was just going to get something that the group needed. But that's not what Judas did. He left early, but he didn't go to buy more wine or bread. It's a little blurry, the exact steps he took this night, but without a doubt, he prearranged to betray Jesus, and he was looking for when the time would be right. He negotiated the price. It's a safe assumption that this meeting tonight was to arrange the final details, to rally the rulers to put the finishing touches on the plan. The plan. How do you arrest a man who claims to be Messiah during the festival in a way that's not going to draw attention and lead to the crowd dividing? I don't know. It's got to be tonight because he just fell right into the trap. Think about this. This could not be more perfect. If they arrested him in the daytime, they would have had to use nearly surgical precision in the midst of a bustling, crowded city. The size of the city was approximately the size of Disney's Magic Kingdom parking lot, the walled portion of the ancient city. This parking lot has a capacity they report exceeds 100,000 people a day, but still, Disney's a situation. Estimates of the city during the daytime of the festival ranged from anywhere between 120 to 250,000 people. There's no way this arrest could take place during the day. They could break into the spot where Jesus was observing Passover, but then they'd have to skip it themselves. Now, the rulers are going to demonstrate a pretty unique flexibility of conscience during this whole period of time, but skipping the Passover is a stretch even for them. I imagine they've been stumped and growing anxious. When this festival's over, everybody's leaving, and that includes Jesus. He doesn't live here. And if he slips the net, they're going to have to wait possibly up to 12 more months for him to come back. And boy, oh boy, has he done a lot in 12 months. No. It has to be this festival. And when Jesus heads out to the garden this night, after he's not supposed to be outside, boy, I bet Judas and the rulers' hearts just soared. Think about it. It's outside the city. It's quiet. It's secluded, it's dark, it's perfect. With the trap set, all it took was picking the right people to go make the arrest. Did they pick people who would keep the stories to themselves? Did they pick thugs? Whoever it was had to be convinced to break the code and go out tonight. So I imagine the cream of the crop is probably waiting inside the high priest's house, and the ruffians were sent to fetch this fake Messiah. Regardless, once everyone in the garden realized what was going on, it was too late. They were surrounded. The disciples began to leap into action, but given their dreary state after their day and after dinner and after their interrupted naps, precision had gone out the window. Peter grabbed for his sword and started swinging wildly, cutting off the ear of the high priest's servant. John Mark lost his cloak, ran away into the night. The others scrambled as quickly as they could to find an escape route, and the steely-eyed main character suddenly dropped the quiet determination and said, "No more of this." And the frantic garden became quiet for one more moment. Jesus shifted his demeanor, and the man who would ultimately be arrested and killed performed one final healing miracle. He reached out his hand to one of the ones who had come for him, and he healed him. Then he turned his attention to the rest of the crowd and said, "Am I a criminal that you come to arrest me with swords and clubs? I was with you all day, and you did nothing. But This is your hour and the power of darkness. What a line. This is all happening in the natural realm, just outside the gates of the walled city of Jerusalem, probably April 3rd, 33 AD, sometime after sundown that had happened on that night at 6:23 p.m. This all happened in the physical, natural realm. But just through the veil that separates the natural from the spiritual realms, what must these words have meant to the demonic spiritual forces that had amassed in the spiritual places around Jerusalem on this night? You almost imagine they're drinking this scene in as if they're watching a Broadway production unfold, and the explosion of sound that must have accompanied that line, "This is the power of darkness," would have been deafening. In the script of this night, in the minds of the powers of evil and darkness, this is the line they were looking for. This is our night. Our time has come. Since Genesis chapter 3:15, the powers of darkness had waited for this. I'm sure other characters in the Bible had thrown them off, but each one had been dispatched so easily. I mean, this Jesus guy had been different from each of them, and after the triumphal entry on Sunday, I bet everybody was sweating in their boots, but just like Moses, and just like David, and Solomon, and John the Baptist, and Joshua, and all the prophets and priests and kings that had come before, they thought, we got him. We're going to drop another threat to the rule of evil on the planet. And so they seized him, and they led him away to the house of Caiaphas, the high priest. wonder how long after they arrived at Caiaphas' house when everybody realized that they had gathered for a trial. I mean, it's not that this location wouldn't have held an interrogation. It's not that the makeup of people wasn't appropriate for such a matter. It's just, this is a holy night. And not just any holy night, it's Passover. You cannot be outside tonight. Passover was instituted in Exodus chapter 12. On the night in question, the Lord told Moses that the children of Israel were to gather in their homes and prepare to leave Egypt because he was going to deliver them from the bondage with the 10th and final plague, death. On this night, the 14th of Nisan, all the way back in the Egyptian province of Goshen, the Lord told his people to spread the blood of a lamb on the doorpost of their home because he was going to send the angel of death to pass over the land of Egypt and kill every firstborn male as punishment for the Egyptian Pharaoh's refusal to let the people of Israel go. Anyone found outside the door of a home without the blood on the doorpost was subject to judgment. Everyone found outside was flaunting their willful ignorance of the command of God through Moses as recorded in the law. No one goes out. Everyone stays inside and obeys. But the hypocrisy of Jesus' arrest and trial doesn't end there. The law doesn't expressly forbid trials on holy days, but it does forbid work. And a trial, typically a capital case, would last 2 days. And that was work. And there's no work done on holy days, so we can imply that this would be a bending of the rules. But the height of hypocrisy is what the Mishnah states. The Mishnah was born from the spoken traditions of the rabbis. The law was clear on sacrifices and the rituals and the dates and the actions, but some of the particulars about how and some of the ceremony that led up to the various ceremonies weren't written down. So the Jewish leaders took it upon themselves to create a handbook that contained some rules and traditions that would become codified. Over time, this book had become encoded into a book of laws about the law, and that became the Mishnah. When Jesus walked around ministering, the scribes and Pharisees kept trying to trap him and incite the people to rise up against him because he never broke the law, but he always, seemingly on purpose, violated the Mishnah, their law. And this stuff can be petty at times. There was once a time where they tried to trap Jesus by talking about hand washing. They had specific ways that hands were to be washed before eating, and Jesus and his folks just breezed right past those requirements. Other times, they were a much bigger deal. The law required certain things be given to the temple, but the Mishnah had created loopholes whereby religious people of Jesus' day could sidestep the heart of the law and deny others from getting at their massive wealth. When Jesus pushed against this caveat, he got pretty heated. He told them this was not to be done. And through this period of discussion, he actually warned his disciples that these religious folks were the equivalent of blind guides. To quote him, it's the blind leading the blind. They were deeply offended because they took their laws so seriously and their hearts had started in the right place. They'd only gotten to this after what happened when the Seleucids had desecrated the temple around 167 BC. The Pharisees were formed so that by strictly obeying the law, they could prevent further judgment. They were trying, they were genuine, but Jesus wasn't after their actions, he wanted their hearts. These sorts of exchanges heated up over the course of the gospel accounts and created the backing of the offense that would ultimately lead to tonight's trial. But here's the kicker. In an attempt to make the law even more abundantly clear on the matter of trial, the Mishnah states that no trial can be conducted on a holy day. There are scholars who will rightly point out that Jesus is not actually condemned to death in this courtyard, so maybe we get away with calling this a strict interrogation that bent a few rules, but sorry, I can't give you that because the Mishnah is explicit on some other points. Nothing like this can be conducted at night. This has to be done during the day. This has to be done over 2 days with supervision and never in a private residence. So this argument makes as much sense as when you tried to sneak back into mom and dad's house after curfew and then tried to make up that you were just out at a prayer gathering with your most spiritual friends. The defense crumbles with the slightest breeze. This trial, interrogation, whatever you want to call it, is in direct contradiction to the very set of rules the religious leaders were so offended that Jesus had violated. They gathered that night in defiance of their own rules, trying him for breaking their laws. It's injustice at its rankest and nastiest. It's hypocrisy and dead religion at its grossest. The innocent, spotless one will be tried by the blind guides, so obsessed with the sanctity of their own rules and so enamored with control, they'll burn the one who came to sign away their debt. Peter and John are both here at Caiaphas' house that night. John's known by whoever's guarding the gate. And so he's led into the courtyard where it's all going down, but Peter's stuck outside observing at a distance. The trial begins with a bunch of witnesses trying to put stories together, but by their own accounts, they're discrediting themselves. It's hasty and everybody seems a little groggy. Passover will do that to you. The meat is centered on lamb surrounded by carbohydrates and washed down with at least 4 cups of wine. Every person in this courtyard has had this meal tonight, and the trial's starting to look like the hatchers of the plot spent more time planning the details of the arrest and less time rehearsing their testimony. They keep centering on the fact that he said he would destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days. He had said this earlier in the week, and it hadn't made much sense to the disciples. Maybe he was being figurative. I mean, how could anyone destroy this magnificent structure and rebuild it all by themselves in 3 days? Either way, there was no charge that was worthy of anything. I mean, maybe blaspheming, but renovating the temple was an ongoing project, so that hardly counts. The meandering night starts to come to a head when the high priest grabs control of the narrative, sets his gaze directly at Jesus and asks him the question, "Are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed?" Now wait. He's already answered this question. Not only that, he's been quite direct about it with his disciples, but he's just charged them not to tell anyone. I mean, it's not a secret. He's about to drop the mic in a second. He'll answer this in the most direct and prophetic way possible. But while all this has been happening, roosters have been crowing. Peter sneaked in, but he didn't make it all the way in. I mean, you got to hand it to this guy. He's persistent, he's loyal, his heart's in the right place, and he's clearly taken with Jesus, and he will follow him, watch this, just like Peter said he would. Peter called this moment right here, earlier in the week. He told Jesus, they're all going to run, but I won't. And true to his word, he was right there. But Jesus had told him before this had happened that he would pray for Peter, that when he was being tested, his faith not fail. And the test was upon him in this very moment. The crowd had been agitating, and the fervor must have been rising all throughout the courtyard because this was not going according to plan. Then one of the servant girls recognized Peter. She said, "I've seen you before. You were with him." And Peter denied it, and immediately the first rooster crowed. And that's what Jesus warned Peter about. Tonight, before the rooster crows twice, you will deny me 3 times. Peter's foggy brain suddenly started to register guilt. His mouth probably dried up, and he stumbled into the gateway where another girl cried, "He's one of them!" And he slurred out another hasty denial while his heart retched in his chest. But this time, the men around him must have caught his accent because suddenly they joined in with the girls, "You're a Galilean!" And he began to rain curses down on himself. And for a 3rd time, "I don't know who he is." And the rooster crowed. And Luke's gospel says, and the Lord turned and looked at Peter, and Peter flees. Jesus turns back to answer the question the high priest just asked, "Are you the Christ?" Jesus says, "I am. And you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming with the clouds of heaven." And the high priest tips from hypocrisy to blasphemy. They're trying Jesus for breaking what is not the law, but rather the Mishnah. But now the high priest, who's been in clear violation of his own rules, breaks the actual law of Moses and rends his garments in fury. Why? Jesus has just quoted the most important prophetic apocalyptic vision of the Old Testament. He has invoked Daniel chapter 7. When someone invokes a portion of a prophecy, they're invoking all of it. Here's what Jesus has just said in full. Coming on the clouds of heaven, there came one like the Son of Man, and he came to the Ancient of Days and presented him. And to him was given dominion and glory and a kingdom that all peoples, nations, and languages shall serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion which shall not pass away, and his kingdom one that shall not be destroyed. Tonight started about a petty trial over control, and Jesus just summoned the ultimate power play of the universe. He has just looked at the spiritual head of the Jewish people and said, bow in the presence of the king, the I am of Moses' burning bush, the all-consuming fire of Elijah's prophecy, the marching sound in the trees behind King David is standing in front of you. And immediately his fate was sealed. He must die. He has to die. He has to. He has to. He's not just claimed to be a holy man. He's claimed to be the one that Daniel spoke of. And here's the thing. Daniel's never wrong. Daniel prophesied to Cyrus, and the people went back to their homeland. Daniel prophesied Alexander the Great, Antiochus IV, the Roman Empire. Daniel prophesied all of it. Daniel's prophecy is so accurate and so revealed and so powerful. This is the guy that lions couldn't get, who could translate languages written on walls by disembodied hands. People had claimed to be somebody before, but Jesus just claimed to be the one. Traditions and laws and rituals had all been thrown to the wind tonight. The religious rulers were in way over their heads, and they'd broken their own rules, and the high priest had just broken the law of Moses. So dignity and rigidity lay in tatters, but there was one final hurdle between Jesus and the cross. There lay the most powerful empire the world had ever known. Fashioned from a tribal group in Italy in or around 625 BC, Rome had risen over the past 6 centuries to dominate the known world, and they ruled with cruel and unflinching power. As the empire spread, the Roman people were a minority in conquered territories. So while client kings would sit on thrones, the power of their rule was about suppressing threats to Roman rule. Crucifixion, beatings, torture, all these things served an ultimate purpose: to remind a conquered people they had indeed been conquered, and that insurrection would be treated with the utmost cruelty. The garrison assigned to Jerusalem was not particularly large, but Pontius Pilate had been dispatched to the city in a very public display of Roman rule because holy observances were a known time of political uprising, especially amongst the Jews. The final hurdle in the Jews' desire to crucify Jesus was to convince the Romans that Jesus was worthy of death. The thing is, Jesus posed no immediate threat to Caesar, and nothing he was claiming was worthy of Roman notice. Pilate and the Romans in the city were there out of obligation, and they were serving their superiors, and their ultimate goal was to do as little work as possible and get back out of the place they hated so much. They despised the Jews because the Jews thought they were superior and because they held that a Messiah was going to deliver them from Roman rule. But no Roman legionnaire was worried about anything that Jesus could be doing. The morning after Caiaphas' blasphemy, the rulers bound Jesus and dragged him before Pilate. This was the last thing Pilate wanted. It was widely known that Pilate's favorite summer retreat was his home in Caesarea. He just traveled into Jerusalem for this festival, and he was headed right back out. So there was nothing about questioning Jesus that appealed to him. Plus, his wife had warned him about Jesus. While it had been going down in the high priest's backyard, Pilate's wife had been warned in a dream to have nothing to do with Jesus, and she sent word to her husband, "You better steer clear," but Pilate ignored her. Jesus' demeanor had reverted to the steely-eyed, determined guy who'd roused his disciples from sleep in Gethsemane last night, and he was giving Pilate rather short and cryptic answers. Pilate asked if Jesus was the king, and Jesus said, "You say so." Pilate wanted to rush this thing to completion, so he keeps telling Jesus, "They have so many charges against you. What am I going to do with you?" Since Jesus is a Galilean, Pilate calls Herod, the client king of the Jews, to question Jesus, and between the both of them, they get nothing. They get frustrated. The only good thing that comes from this is the two of them, they actually end up building a common bond. They weren't friends before, but after this, I don't know, silver lining, I guess. Herod's guard mock Jesus and revile him and send Jesus back to Pilate, who out of exasperation addresses the people and says, "There's nothing with this man that deserves anything, but I'll punish him and release him." There's not a correlation between what Pilate just said. His decision to punish Jesus, in other words, Pilate found nothing wrong with Jesus, but as a favor to the people, and so that the Roman superiors would see what a good protector of Rome he was, Pilate was going to have Jesus punished anyway, but the rulers and the crowds wouldn't have it. There's a hand washing where Pilate declares his innocence, and I can almost imagine his wife has sent word to him again throughout the day saying, "I told you not to get mixed up in this. What are you doing?" He's second-guessing. His wife's mad at him. He hates helping the Jews. They're being pushy, and there's no evidence. So it all adds up to something he really should not have gotten involved with. And I'm 100% certain that he's just furious at this point and wants to leave the city entirely. And the scripture says, but when Pilate saw he was getting nowhere and a riot was about to start, stop. Will Pilate stamp out the riot? Of course. Does Pilate fear that this Jesus character is going to sit enthroned tonight after the glorious uprising? No. Is Pilate afraid the people are going to storm his house and kill him? I highly doubt that. Pilate is afraid of the repercussions from Rome. When the higher-ups find out that the people rioted, Pilate will definitely not have his same place, and he might not escape with his life, depending on how badly the rioting spreads. Rome ruled with fear and intimidation, not just of the conquered people, but also with those assigned to do the enforcing of Rome's authority. What's happening right now is dangerous for everybody. The people must be getting desperate because a riot means death for many of them in the crowd, and the religious rulers will likely be traded out. Caiaphas is only high priest because his father-in-law, Annas, was removed by the Romans 15 years ago due to, wait for it, a charge of political insecurity. So the religious rulers deciding to play the riot card had better work out, or this is going south for every person I've just mentioned so far. And I haven't even begun to talk about Herod. Herod's family is related to the Hasmonean dynasty, the one established after the Maccabean revolt, the last kings to legitimately rule Israel prior to Roman conquest. So if Herod gets deposed, then the final semi-legitimate remaining heir to the throne is gone. This tiny little verse gets skipped right past, but it holds the key to interpreting the swift hammer of judgment that falls on Jesus. Make no mistake, this is all a part of God's design plan to deliver on his promise to send a Redeemer, a Messiah, a Savior. But for every actor on the street on April 4, 33 AD, one misstep, and you could end up like Judas Iscariot earlier today, racked with guilt. He'd hurled the money back into the temple and hanged himself because of what he'd done to Jesus. There's been roughhousing, mockery up to this point, but this is where the ugly brutality begins in earnest. Jesus is stripped, he's flogged, he's scourged, he has a crown of thorns slammed upon his head. In case you ever tried to keep score of all the brutality that's happened to him in this short period of time, it would have killed most people. Most people didn't survive what Jesus endured, and it makes me pause and wonder, why? Sin is bad, evil is evil. Injustice, oppression, murder, slavery, adultery, all the horrible things that humans have done to other humans are all horrid, but they require the blood sacrifice of a perfect human. Now that's coming in a minute, but that's not this part. Why did he endure this part? I think there are two reasons. The first is obedience. He fulfilled prophecy out of obedience to the plan of his Father. He never took a shortcut. He never dropped a part of what others might consider insignificant. The second reason is life more abundantly. This whole thing is so that you and I might have life. The cross, the resurrection, they're to free his people from slavery and oppression once and for all. But this bit right here, this is a bonus. These stripes are for your healing. This beating is so that he can walk alongside you and tell you, I know what it's like to be beaten for no reason, to be abandoned by all your friends, to be lied about, to be used as a pawn in someone's game to ride to the top, to have the crowd turn against you for no reason, to be the butt of some wildly hypocritical joke, to have a boy sucking up to his daddy-in-law, trying to cement a legacy, use me as a bargaining chip, and on and on and on. That is why he did this. But it's not done yet. He's been brutalized and humiliated and survived what would have killed most people. But now they have to get him to Golgotha, the place of the skull. In most artistic renditions, the sun is setting on some far-off hill, while high above the line of sight, 3 crosses rise into the sky holding 3 figures, with one suspended slightly higher than the others. Not reality. This cross was placed by a thoroughfare where people traveled, and it was at eye level. It was designed as a reminder that Rome was in charge and that the viewer was seeing a reminder of the absolute rule and authority of the Roman Empire. Jesus makes it part of the way up the hill. He's stumbling and he's unable to bear the weight of his cross, so Simon the Cyrene carries the cross the remainder of the way up the hill. Simon is another victim of artistic whitewashing of this narrative. Purge from your minds the medieval artistic renderings, they're all wrong. He was nailed to the cross and hoisted up and placed to begin the slow, painful process of asphyxiating or dying from exposure, or an amalgamation of his wounds and the rest of the process. Any way it happened, if you made it this far, you did not die quickly on the cross. It was an agonizing process designed for the maximum benefit of the crucifier. Don't end up like them. Many apocalyptic signs have begun to occur. Darkness has covered the land. The curtain in the temple that separated the holy place where everyone could gather was suddenly rent in two from top to bottom. They fetched him wine because he's been speaking. He said that he was thirsty. He's asked his Father to forgive them. He's told one of the 2 crucified on either side of him that he'll be with Jesus in paradise. He'll cry out that it's finished. He's quoted David's psalm, my God, why have you forsaken me?" All of these hold deep, significant value for study and consideration as they pertain to his divinity. But one saying, above all others, speaks to the depth of his humanity. He's been largely abandoned by his followers and his friends. And the Gospels are a little bit spotty on where everyone is at this precise moment as he hangs on the cross. There are some who are observing some distance away. One Gospel states that it's a group of his followers. Most of the Gospels are explicit that the brave ones are the women. Jesus' traveling group is a scandalous mixture of ragamuffin men with checkered pasts, illiterate men, learned men, single or even married women. The Gospels are quite clear that it is, in fact, the group of women who are amongst the crowd observing the spectacle of Jesus' crucifixion. But John's Gospel provides the best detail for what's happening right up close to the cross. Those who have followed Jesus to the bitter end are John, the apostle, and Jesus' mother, Mary. In fact, they're so close that as Jesus hangs from the cross, one of his 7 sayings is a fulfillment of the law of Moses. Firstborn sons were commanded to care for their parents. And since Jesus healed the guy whose ear Peter chopped off last night, there's been no one specific thing that he's done that was just for one person. It's all been wildly prophetic, and it's been a part of his fulfillment of the plan of his heavenly Father. But right at the end, it's almost as if the story of your and my redemption pauses, and in a moment that can just be described as sheer, tender, loving humanity, Jesus pulls himself up enough to get air, stare directly at his mom, and say, speaking of his best friend John standing with Mary, "Behold your son." And then to John, "Behold your mother." One of his final earthly acts was to make sure that the woman who bore him, who dedicated him, who raised him, who pushed him into ministry, who had stood by him through every single thing, was cared for. This is one of the most fascinating things about the Bible to me, just how raw and human the whole thing is. What must this have felt like for Mary? Mary had been picked as a teenager for an assignment she never dreamed of. Who wants to be the mother of the Son of God and live your entire life with everyone thinking you're a liar and watching not just what it costs you, but what it costs your family and your son? And not just your oldest. Jesus' brother James, too. By the time this is all said and done, Jesus will be crucified. He'll be resurrected, but James will be beaten to death by the scribes and Pharisees. Mary will suffer rejection and some of the deepest emotional turmoil any human has ever suffered, watching what her sons will endure, all in the name of salvation for the very ones heaping the abuse on her and on them. I marvel at the faith of this woman. All the way back when she was a teenager, the scriptures say that she treasured up the things she was observing in her heart. The word that's used in Greek is diatero, and it means to preserve or to keep from drifting. Over 33 years of injustice and abuse, she had stoked the fire of preservation that meant she was standing upright watching all of this happen. Was she remembering Luke chapter 2 when she met Anna and Simeon in the temple when Jesus was 8 days old and she'd been warned that a sword would pierce her soul? Was she treasuring the moment that Jesus had stepped up at the wedding and turned water into wine and performed his first miracle that launched his earthly ministry because his mother had gently prodded him, "Son, it's time to be the Savior. Go, you're ready." Was she treasuring those gap years from the silence of the Gospels between Jesus' 12th and 30th years? 18 years where his father clearly died or left, likely died, and Jesus had assumed the role of caregiver for the household. Was she treasuring something particular that happened during those 3 years of his whirlwind earthly ministry? Had it dawned on her before April the 4th that what Jesus kept saying about being crucified and rising from the dead was not figurative, but actually quite literal? Was Mary the first human, aside from her son, to know that Jesus really was the promised Messiah and that his coming kingdom in his fullest really did mean that he would have to die in order to properly defeat death? I don't know the answer to those questions, but tonight, just like Mary, I want you to stand and consider the cross. Consider what you've heard here tonight. Consider the claim of the most validated ancient documents of all time, the Gospels, and consider the weight. It is appropriate tonight to sit with what we've done. And the proper response is lament. Lament is a word that means sorrow or grief directed to God for the sin or wrongdoing that we have done. Lament is the bridge between grief or sorrow, a proper response to this story, and trust, a proper response when considering this story through the resurrection and Easter Day coming on Sunday. But make no mistake, this should trigger sorrow for what we have done. Wait a minute. What we've done? The Romans did that to him. The Jews did that to him. I did nothing. Jesus hung on the cross for around 3 hours. And then he said, "It is finished." And he breathed his last. When the authorities came to check on the bodies, because of the timing of the whole thing, they were prepared to break the leg so they could speed up the process of dying. And this wouldn't be the first time. Those people tasked with performing crucifixions were experts, and there was no bungling this job. They knew what they were doing. Even though they'd beaten and abused Jesus, and even though he was disfigured and bloodied, and even though he'd suffered, they still thought they needed to take one extra step to kill him. So if the beating didn't kill him, and the cross didn't kill him, what did? Before Jesus said, "It is finished," he cried out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" This is a prophetic quoting of Psalm 22, where David has prophesied what will happen to the Messiah. When the disciples had asked to sit next to Jesus on thrones, he'd ask them, "Can you drink from the cup that I'm going to drink from?" There's this lingering prophetic idea in the Gospels that when Jesus says he's going to be crucified, he must drink from the cup of the wrath of his Father poured out for sin. What killed Jesus on the cross was something he had never experienced and something no one would ever experience again. In a moment, the perfect Son of God, who had known nothing but unbroken connection to his Father for his entire life, experienced what it was for God to turn his face away from him and pour out the cup of his wrath, of justice and judgment for your sin and mine onto his perfect Son. Jesus waged my sin against his innocence, and in one divine moment accepted the wrath and judgment of God for the debt that I owed. And that killed Jesus. And the finish was so swift and so clear and so terrible that the Gospels record the Roman centurion watching the last moment transpire state, surely this was the Son of God. The hardened enemy of every person on that hill was so arrested by what he saw that day that in one terrifying moment, he changed everything about his tune and said, "Oh my God, we just killed God." The people surrounding the event are even recorded as slinking away, beating their chests for what had happened. There was a mighty earthquake. And people who had died rose up from their tombs and walked around the city, and there was a great shaking of the earth. I can't prove this. But a study of the Greek wording when Jesus said, "If these children don't praise me, the rocks will cry out." And the word that Matthew uses in his gospel to describe the earthquake at Jesus' death are eerily similar. It's as if, because the people cried out, "Crucify him, he's not Messiah," the rocks cried out the opposite. And so it was done. The hour of darkness. Evil had once again prevailed. Think about that. From the time of Genesis until 33 AD, every single time the rule of evil on the planet had been threatened, this was the result. Death, the end. Make no mistake, there's no theater involved in this. Jesus was completely stone dead. And every one of his disciples had given up hope. How do you know that? They took him down, they embalmed him in so many spices and ointments. They used generational, life-changing wealth to embalm him and to place him in a tomb. And in the minds of every single person who followed Jesus, it seemed like it was over and it was done. Because evil had won. Or had it?
Oh